from. We don't know who's been organising it. And as we learn out that these are Chinese people and they're probably illegal immigrants, we start hearing these words about snakeheads and triads. So every single element of the inquiry we were starting from scratch from.
At this stage, the police had picked up 11 Chinese nationals and 1 Englishwoman. Immigration checks revealed that most of the Chinese victims and survivors had entered the country illegally. Officers had recovered their fishing permits, all bearing false names, but getting explanations from the survivors was proving tough.
Mainly they are frightened Chinese illegal immigrants who are scared of the authorities, who aren't speaking to us. We've got difficulties over language and culture, and we're aware they've been threatened, so we need to speak to those.
So how are we doing? I've got 4 names so far, various ages. That's about as far as I've got. Right. How are we all feeling?
The few answers the survivors gave made little sense, and their explanation for being out in the bay on that cold February night was clearly a lie.
The initial witnesses said they'd been on a picnic, and it was quite apparent at that time that something serious had got on, but it was going to take a heck of a lot of work to get to the truth of what had happened.
As the questioning went on, police began to suspect that some survivors were being intimidated by other members of the group.
An experienced detective inspector came to me and said he thought there was 4 of the group who appeared to be the organisers from the way they were sat, the demeanour, and the fact that everyone else was cowering and seemed to look at these 4 as to what they should say to us. And just off body language, it looked like we could identify who the organisers were.
Those suspected organisers were later placed under arrest. 3 were Chinese, the 4th was an Englishwoman, Janie Bannister.
I've got a load of Chinese boys in Morecambe and they're stuck.
Police quickly identified her as the woman who had alerted the Coast Guard.
And how many are out there, do you know?
There's a lot, and they need a plane or something. You're going to have to get them on today.
Detectives saw that she too was being put under intense pressure.
Very quickly we interviewed Janie Bannister, who'd been there on the night and was a girlfriend of one of the Chinese. She was 5 months pregnant, and she said to us, "I want to tell you the truth of what's happened." And she told us that the main man was also in the cells, but he was giving us false details.
Janie Bannister then agreed to give a full statement, pointing the finger at 2 men, her boyfriend Lin Mu Yong and his cousin, the alleged gangmaster Lin Liang Ren. According to her, Ren had received a large order for cockles from a local seafood supplier. Rather than turn that order down, he'd made his workers walk out onto Morecambe Bay in life-threatening conditions. The police now had something to go on. On the night of the tragedy, police found Ren walking along a road 2 miles from the beach, but he flatly denied being involved in the incident. This contradicted Janie Bannister's claim that Ren was in charge and had been waiting at the shore as the workers walked out to sea. The police believed Janie, who they no longer suspected of any wrongdoing, but hers was a lone voice. All the other survivors backed Ren's version of events.
No admissions were coming from anywhere else, so it was quite clear at that early stage we were going to have to prove everything, because basically it was Janie's word against everyone else, and the allegation was she was only saying that to kind of get out of custody and get out of trouble.
With Ren denying everything, detectives desperately needed the other survivors to talk, but 3 days of questioning brought nothing. Reluctantly, they handed the survivors over to the care of the asylum service.
It was quite clear that people had been told to lie and intimidated to lie. I mean, the survivors are in a foreign country. They're reliant on their managers, organisers for where to live. So they're very much beholden to them, and they were told without any doubt, you won't identify who the proper leader is, and you'll blame the people who are dead.
Breaking down this protective wall of silence surrounding Ren was going to be long and arduous. The survivors were scared, not just of Ren, but of the police themselves.
They just didn't realise that we would, despite the fact that they came here illegally, offer them as much protection as we legitimately could within the bounds of the law to ensure that they were kept safe, kept secure, and able to testify against Lin Lianran.
They did not know whether the police was there to help the immigration to get them back into China. They were not sure what's going to happen. On top of that, they were frightened of the defendant.
But the job of the police was about to become even harder. Within hours of being handed to the asylum service, the survivors all fled.
Oh, great. Listen, have you got any idea where they've gone?
Detectives now had no way of proving Janie Bannister's story.
It was a major blow that all these witnesses had gone.
Yeah, it's me. No, they've gone. You've got no idea where they might have gone. Oh, great.
The media and the country are looking at us to find out how 23 people have died, and our main people who can tell us have just gone.
Yeah. Come on, might as well go.
It was the crucial part of the inquiry that we traced these witnesses again, and we got their assistance, and they told us the truth. Without them, we didn't have anything, and we needed them, and we also needed the help of the hidden Chinese communities that were in this country at the time, so that we could deliver to the criminal justice system the evidence in this case.
First of all, the witnesses, those surviving witnesses, some of them gave what were patently false accounts of what had gone on. Then almost immediately after the event, some of those witnesses disappeared. So we had a case that, on the one hand, appeared to be contradictory, and then before our eyes was disappearing. So it looked, I have to say, very unpromising.
Tracking down the survivors wasn't going to be easy. As illegal immigrants, they were used to living life under the radar of the authorities. Police dispatched officers to London's Chinatown and to other Chinese communities across the UK. They also issued appeals through the Chinese media.
So I had to talk to different Chinese free newspapers, as well as the criminal elements, to get the contact into the Chinese community. And it was the whole team bringing all these things together that gave people the confidence that we were going to treat them fairly, but also that we actually wanted to do something about it, and we weren't going to go away.
But despite all their efforts in Britain, the breakthrough for the police was to come 5,000 miles away. 6 days after the tragedy, finally they were able to identify the stranded cockle picker who had made the frantic phone call while drowning.
Hello, please, where are you?
A newspaper published a front-page picture of the man's family holding up his photograph. His name was Guo Bin Long. He'd arrived in Britain 12 months earlier. The truck driver had left behind a wife, a son, and an adoptive daughter, hoping to make enough money to give them a better life. But those dreams had ended on Morecambe Sands on February the 5th, 2004. That night, as well as calling the emergency services, he'd also phoned his family.
We were all still asleep except for his parents. They were up. He said that he is now in great danger and he was asking his mother to pray for him. He didn't give any details. He just said, "I am in the sea now and the water is up to my neck. Pray for me." And then the sound disappeared. His mother then came and woke us up and we started to pray for him while waiting for his phone call, but nothing came.
The identification of Guo Bin Long helped the authorities discover the names of other victims, and one by one, their tragic stories also emerged.
The more we investigated the background and circumstances of the people that had been killed, these were people with wives, with husbands, with children, that there were orphans now in China as a consequence of this.
Xu Bing was one of those orphans. His father had left home 6 years earlier. His mother had travelled to Britain to be reunited with him just 2 weeks before. This photograph of the couple was taken at Morecambe Bay by one of the survivors of the tragedy. They'd called their son only hours before they died.
They rang to say they brought me new clothes, a tradition for the Chinese Lantern Festival the next day, and they said they'd send them to me. I told them they needn't work so hard. I told them you can earn money step by step.
Many of the other victims were also breadwinners. Their deaths had plunged their families into even deeper poverty, making the authorities in Britain even more determined to prosecute those responsible.
I think the whole of the legal team, and certainly the investigative team, what we felt was, if this was my son, my daughter, no matter what they'd done, I'd want justice for them. And that's how we felt. We wanted to achieve justice not only for the people who lost their lives, but also for their families.
In the months following the Morecambe Bay tragedy, police gradually managed to identify most of the 23 dead cockle pickers, men and women, all aged between 18 and 45. But if they were going to get justice for their families, they still needed to track down the survivors and persuade them to testify against the alleged gangmaster, Lin Liang Ren. The hunt for those key witnesses would lead them to one of the oldest Chinese communities in Britain, and it would bring detectives face to face with one of the leading members of the feared Chinese underworld.
It was a rather bizarre conversation, because it was one of those conversations of, I know that you know that I know what you're doing, but I want your help.
2 months after the Morecambe Bay tragedy, detectives were still trying to trace the survivors. All were believed to be illegal immigrants, frightened not only of the police, but of the criminal gangs who had smuggled them into the UK and put them to work. At the heart of this people trafficking network were the so-called snakehead gangs. They recruit workers from China, all willing to pay for the promise of a better life in Britain.
If you pay about £15,000, you'll come over a land route from China through the Ukraine, through to mainland Europe, and then probably end up in the back of a wagon being transported through the Channel Tunnel, and you come into this country. And that when you get here, there are job opportunities in the restaurant trade, massage parlours, or picking food. And it's a business that is so well organised.
Once in Britain, the workers earn a pittance, with most of their wages being used to repay the debts they incurred in getting here. Morecambe Bay victim Guo Bin Long had barely enough money left to feed himself.
He wants to earn more money and pay the debts back quickly. Sometimes he has to work during the night because sometimes there is a night tide. Sometimes he has to spend the night at the seaside with just a piece of bread for food.
In reality, it's not what they were told by those who organized them to come into this country. It's much harder. They found without work permit, they cannot be protected by the law. There's no such thing, it's called minimum wage. They could be paid anything, and they can't argue with the boss. They just have to take whatever they can lay their hands on. So life is extraordinarily hard for them.
Detectives discovered that the Morecambe Bay cocklers had been living in Liverpool, home of Britain's oldest Chinese community. It was a far cry from the life the snakehead gangs had promised them back in China.